Good morning, everyone. I hope you all have a seat. This conference is going to be in English and in Hungarian. If you need a headset, please take one and keep it until you leave the conference, okay? Keep it on your chair. That's what the technicians asked us to do. So you can take one. And I will say this in Hungarian as well. Mindenkit szeretettel köszöntünk, kedves vendégek, akinek szüksége van tolmácsolásra. A terem végében a kalapos hölgynél tud szerezni egy fülhallgatót és egy adóvevőt. Azt szeretnénk kérni, hogy ezt a nap végéig, vagy amíg el nem mennek, tartsák maguknál, tehát a szünetekben nem kell visszaadni. Jó? Csak a legvégén addig a székükön lehet, és mi majd megőrizzük. Welcome everybody to TransELTE 2026. Your Excellence, Madam Head of the Representation, dear Vice Dean, and dear Head of our department and Director of our Institute. The topic of our conference is Natural Intelligence in Professional Language Mediation. And first of all, I'm going to ask Willem van Ey, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to open this conference.
Good morning, everybody. Jó reggelt. That's about the only Hungarian that I speak, unfortunately. So I will speak in the lingua franca, English. Goedemorgen in Dutch, for those who speak Dutch. I know there are also Dutch students in the hall. And I'm very happy to see you all here and to welcome you to the TransELTE conference with this year's topic, a very important topic, natural intelligence in professional language mediation. This event highlights the importance of language and the understanding through language in a time when technology and artificial intelligence, AI, are becoming more and more influential in all parts of our lives. Even in election campaigns, I fear, where it has become quite a challenge to distinguish facts from fiction. Natural intelligence is the human capacity for understanding, interpreting, and creating meaning, and this is fundamental to language and translation studies, what you're doing. While artificial intelligence has significantly improved efficiency and accessibility, the added value of human involvement remains irreplaceable. Language is not only a system of rules, but also a cultural and emotional expression. Let me illustrate that with a personal experience. You know, the first 3 years of a child's life is crucial for its emotional development, and therefore child psychologists advise parents to talk to their children those first 3 years in their mother tongue, of the mother and of the father. And that brings across more emotional richness than a learned language could ever do. After those 3 years, obviously, you can add languages freely. This is also true when you have parents of a different nationality, with different mother tongues, where father and mother speak different languages originally. Now my personal experience. I'm married with a Romanian, and my wife and I speak different languages. We have two mother tongues, Dutch and Romanian. We have 2 children. The first 3 years we spoke our mother tongue. My wife spoke Romanian, and I spoke Dutch, obviously. And of course, I'm very proud with the result. Emotionally very stable children. Human translators understand nuance, tone, humor, irony, and context in ways that go beyond literal meaning. They can interpret what is implied rather than just what is stated, adapting messages to fit cultural expectations and social norms. And this is especially important in literature, but also in diplomacy, in my work. And in any context where meaning is layered and sensitive. The use of words implies responsibility. They have weight, and when not used accurately, they can be easily misunderstood or result in conflict. We are experiencing how the simplification of language in general discourse has become commonplace, from the everyday use on social media to speeches by politicians with immense impact, and also their facts and fiction. In times when communication is more and more substituted by images and AI is a fact, nuance is sometimes far away. We can fuel AI with data, but we need nuance and accurateness in communication for mutual understanding and the ability to put things into perspective, making sure that words retain their power. Natural intelligence ensures that language remains a living, meaningful bridge between people, not just a system of interchangeable words. I wish you an inspiring conference, shaping the future of language studies of translators and interpreters. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for the support of the embassy. It is really worth gold to us. And now I would like to ask Zsuzsanna Lérát, the head of the representation of Flanders in Hungary, to give her opening speech.
Jó napot kívánok, good morning and goedemorgen. Your Excellency, dear organizers, dear rector, dear guests and dear participants. As head of the Office of the Diplomatic Representation of Flanders, it is a great privilege and pleasure to welcome you all at the TransELTE 2026 conference. Today you have gathered here not merely as individuals representing institutes, disciplines or nations, but as members of a shared intellectual community, one bound together by curiosity, responsibility, and the steadfast pursuit of knowledge. In a world that is increasingly interconnected, yet often divided, the ability to truly understand one another has never been more important. Understanding, however, is not a passive state. It is an active, deliberate process. It requires openness, humility, and willingness to listen beyond our own perspectives. Conferences, such as TransELTE, create a unique and invaluable space where ideas may cross borders, where dialogue transcends difference, and where collaboration becomes not only possible but inevitable. At the heart of this process stand our professors and scholars, the true ambassadors of knowledge. The transfer of knowledge is essential for understanding, and understanding should not be limited by borders. Last year, I had the privilege of attending a lecture in Bratislava by one of the main organizers of the conference, Réka Essényi, along with her colleague Franciska van Waarden. Today, we are here in Budapest, where we have the opportunity to listen to presentation by several foreign professors, including from Flanders. Thanks to them for coming and for dedicating their time and energy to this conference. The exchange of knowledge forms the cornerstone of understanding, which is why it is such a pleasure to us to support the conference this year as well. Our sincere thanks go to Edina Robin and to Réka Essényi to organize this event. And last but certainly not least, a huge thank to those without them we literally could not understand each other today. The colleagues in the interpreter booths behind you, Sándor Máté and Adam Kis. May TransELTE 2026 inspire meaningful dialogue, foster lasting collaborations, and contribute to a more understanding and connected world. Thank you, and I wish you all a truly enriching and inspiring conference. Thank you.
Zsuzsa, thank you very much, and again, thank you for your support you've given to this conference. And now I would like to ask Orsolya Réthelyi, from ELTE, the Faculty of Humanities. She is the Vice Dean for International Affairs. Please give your opening speech, Orsi.
Thank you, Rika. Dear colleagues, dear guests, dear friends, for the 28th time, the Department of Translation and Interpreting at ELTE is organizing its traditional translation conference, this year entitled Natural Intelligence in Professional Language Mediation. The aim of the TransELTE is, as always, to present, discuss, and strengthen the academic debate on the relationship between translator training, translation research, and the translation market. As head of the Dutch department at the ELTE, I would like to extend a special and heartfelt welcome to the Dutch and Flemish guests. It is a particular joy to see so many familiar and dear faces here today, colleagues and friends from the Netherlands and Flanders, whose work I have long admired and whose presence truly enriches this conference. I also welcome His Excellency Ambassador Willem van E and Ms. Zsuzsanna Lénárt of the representation of Flanders of Hungary. We are honored and grateful that you are both here today. This is the 5th time that I have been invited to open the TransELTE conference as Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities of the ELTE, and I accept this request each year with great joy. I can remember that the very first time I was invited was after a lengthy pause of the COVID period. I was, again, this conference could be arranged or organized in presence, and it was a burst of joy to see all the colleagues who saw each other again after many years of being separated. Again, I read the names and contributors and the titles of the lectures with great interest. The TransELTE conferences are not only a meeting place for professionals and renowned scholars from Hungary and abroad in the field of translation, but also an incubator for young talent. Students from the doctoral program in translation studies present their ongoing research. Students from different departments attend, and students from the department even participate as interpreters for the papers. The theme of this year's conference could not be more timely. As artificial intelligence continues to reshape the landscape of professional language mediation, it is precisely the question of natural intelligence, humor expertise, creativity, and judgment that demands our attention. It is no coincidence that our new rector has launched this September as one of the 3 flagship projects of the complete ELTE University, one in artificial intelligence. So this fits very much into these larger ELTE plans. The lectures and the workshops over these 3 days explore this relationship from multiple perspectives, from competence frameworks and AI literacy to the well-being of the human translator. The TransELTE conference remains a source of pride for the Department of Translation and Interpreting, for the Institute of Language Mediation, and for the Faculty of Humanities as a whole. It stands as a testament to the vitality of the profession and the dedication of scholars and educators who share their experience and create knowledge together. On behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and the Dean of the Faculty, I would like to thank all those colleagues who have dedicated immense time and effort to making this event possible. Head of the Institute, Edina Robin, and her excellent colleagues, Eszenyi Réka and others. I would also like to express my gratitude to the institutions and sponsors that have financially supported the conference. Lastly, I would like to thank you, the participants, arriving from both near and far, for being here and sharing your experience and knowledge. I wish you all an enriching and stimulating 3 days. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Orsi. And the conference is almost open. Last but not least, I would like to ask Edina Robin, the director of the Institute of Language Mediation, to give her opening speech.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Madam Head of Post, Madam Vice Dean, esteemed colleagues and honored guests, as the 4th speaker to open this event today, I have one very important task, and that is to be as short as possible. Yet, I would like to take this opportunity and say a few hopefully meaningful words not generated by AI. On behalf of the host of today's event, ELTE's Institute of Language Mediation, Department of Translation and Interpreting, I would like to welcome our invited speakers, representatives of the profession, researchers and trainers, students, and those who are simply interested in language mediation, whether they are sitting here with us today in the faculty hall or following the proceedings of TransELTE 2026 online. A special welcome is due to the trainers and trainees of the Partium Christian University of Oradea, the Sapientia Hungarian University of Transylvania, and the Josip Strossmayer University of Osijek. This year marks the 28th edition of our traditional Spring Translation Studies Conference, and it is a great pleasure for us that TransELTE has now reached not only national, but regional and even international recognition. Over the course of 3 days, we'll hear the insights of 26 speakers from 12 countries on the latest research findings and good practices within the field of language mediation. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to our international speakers for accepting our invitation and sharing their professional experiences with us. Natural intelligence in professional language mediation is the theme of this year's conference, encompassing a wide range of topics: technological literacy, shifting competencies, the complementary roles of human and artificial intelligence, and the maintenance of the human edge within the changing scenario of the language industry, which is, as portrayed by the ALICE 2026 survey, is more in transition rather than decline. While artificial intelligence and automation are now firmly embedded in professional workflows, the results reveal a notable correction in industry expectations. After initial and perhaps even uncritical enthusiasm for fully automated solutions, service providers increasingly recognize the limits of machine-generated language, as well as the renewed importance of human quality assurance and human expert judgment. The findings of the survey suggest that the future of language mediation will depend less on competing with artificial intelligence than on redefining and articulating the value of natural intelligence, the human capacity to interpret meaning, manage risks, and sustain trust in multilingual communication. Quality, therefore, remains firmly in human hands. Human expertise continues to hold its value, but only as long as we nurture it and provide opportunities for it to grow and change. Here at TransELTE, we can reflect together on not only on what we want to do with the tools now available to us and evolving at a remarkable pace, but also on what we ourselves want to become with these tools. Not victims, not extras, not hidden figures in the ever-expanding spectacle of artificial intelligence dazzling us with new performances each day. Rather, well-informed, well-trained, knowledgeable, and accountable professionals, experts in language mediation who understand their craft and make their own decisions consciously and responsibly. On behalf of ELTE's Department of Translation and Interpreting, I am grateful to all our participants for engaging in this professional discourse and to our generous sponsors for enabling us to organize this conference with such splendor. I would like to express our gratitude to the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the representation of the Flemish government, the Directorate General for Translation of the European Commission, the Hungarian Gazette Publishing and Legal Translation Center, ELTE's University Excellence Fund, and the ELTE Alumni Center for their support. As the head of the organizing committee of TransELTE, I would also like to thank my co-organizing colleagues, my partners in crime, for making this conference a reality, from putting together this impressive program to organizing life-sustaining Wi-Fi and coffee for everyone to enjoy. And I would also like to thank our interpreters in the interpreting booth, our students and their trainers of the European Masters in Conference Interpreting Program. I wish everyone a successful conference with valuable discussions on both theory and practice, research and training, hopefully leading to newly formed and fruitful professional collaborations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for opening the conference. And now we are moving over to science. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Frida Sturs from the KU Leuven and the IV DNT, that's the Institute of the Dutch Language. This is a knowledge institute. And she's going to talk about language in transformation. I think it is also the title of one of your books, Frida. And she's going to compare human intelligence and machine code, if I am right. So we're going to open your slide, and please take the floor.
Sorry, could you have me, which was yours?
Sorry.
Could you please have me, which was yours? What's the name of your presentation?
This one, language in transformation.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you first of all for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be at this wonderful conference where we know in these translation and interpreting conferences and talking about language mediation, a lot of things are going on. I've been the Dean of a faculty of translation and interpreting for many years, and I know that each year something new is happening and things have to change or to be adjusted. So my lecture will be on language in transformation, and this indeed is the title of one of my books, Taal in Transformatie. It was about technology, economy, and the power of generative AI. So in my talk, I will address the language industry, the knowledge economy, and then what is the impact of AI on translation, and what are the new profiles we in university training students should look at. But first, let me start with a little scandal. It happened in University of Ghent, one of the other universities in Flanders. Last year, a new rector was elected, the new chancellor of Ghent University. She used generative AI when drafting her speech. Painful. It was discovered by journalists, and the software she used hallucinated, leading to incorrect quotes from Albert Einstein, among others. The university has acknowledged the errors and has corrected them, but of course this is afterwards, this is damage control. It's painful to see what is happening here. So a lot of, just invented quotes were used in the speech. Is this unthinkable that it will happen? No, I don't think so. I think it is quite predictable that this was going to happen one day or another. Second scandal was a couple of months later, when the former rector from my own university, University of Leuven, he wrote, ironically, a new essay on truth, waarheid, and what happened, it contained at least 7 non-existent quotations and several fictitious literary references. He didn't even admit that what he did, but we all know what happened. So these are the scandals we are working with right now. And indeed, what is fact and what is fiction? So that is the question. Now let me come to the language industry and the translation and interpreting profession. Communication comes at a price. It's not for free. And we see this fast evolution of science and technology where many new concepts are introduced in society. This leads to a need for faster and reliable specialized information. And of course, this happens in an international context. We not live in isolation. We live in Europe. We live in an international market environment. So this results in an enormous increase in multilingual communication. I looked at some of the reports on the language industry, and every of these reports said that the language industry is stable and still growing, so it is not in any form of decline. The demand for language services, including translation and localization, has only increased. And you can see that there is the quote here from the Translate Plus blog on the language industry trends. We can see they predict like a 7% growth each year. The same with the NIMSI reports. You can also have a look at them online. NIMSI Insights, I consult them regularly, is an international market research and consulting company. And again, they conclude the language industry continues to grow globally. They also predict a 7% growth each year. But what is this language industry? When we talk about this sector, this large domain, then we talk about our traditional solutions in translation, interpreting, editing, localizing, learning languages, but also obviously the technological solutions. Machine translation, computer-aided translation, computer-aided language learning, video conferences with interpreters, multilingual search engines, and so on and so on. And now, these technologies already existed for some time. I've been teaching about them for a very long time already, but now there is this layer of AI on top of it, which is a new challenge. But for me, this means that we have a new language-related jobs to think about. We need competent linguists, and we also need a lot of language data in this multilingual world. It all has to do with the knowledge economy we live in. And this knowledge economy is connected to the information society. An information society means a substantial part of economic growth is a result of knowledge. And this knowledge then enables innovation. So more and more people live in this knowledge economy, and this leads to new products and services and to economic growth. Of course, this results in the development of new technologies. And very often then there is the call in society, all the students should go to the so-called STEM direction in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Fine, that's true, but on the other hand, we forget that we need competent language specialists and the necessary language data and language tools. I'm now going to talk a little bit about the Low Countries, about the Netherlands and Flanders, because I come from Flanders. I live in the south of Antwerp, but I've worked for a very long time in Leiden in the Netherlands. And so each year, of each week, for 9 years, I traveled on Monday from the south of Antwerp to just above Rotterdam in Leiden, and these are the two major ports in Europe. So what do we see? We see a lot of economic activity and economic expansion in that region. Flanders and the Netherlands is extremely rich, and this leads also to language and linguistic applications. Think about import and export. All kinds of shipping documents, customs documents, everything that is shipped and traded in textile industry, in food industry, medical products, IT applications, the building industry, this all needs documentation in many, many languages. And that is what sometimes we keep forgetting. So I just made an analysis of the sectors that are important in our area, in the Low Countries, because every country can do that. Look at what are the most important economic domains, because that is where you need translation and interpreting in. So for us, this is building and construction, tourism, energy, medical applications, automotive industry, IT, transport, and so many other domains. I give you just a couple of examples. Basics started as a very small Flemish company in 1919, so more than 100 years ago. Nowadays, they've conquered the world. They've built the largest buildings in the Arabic world, such as Burj Khalifa in Dubai, but also the buildings of the European Parliament in Brussels, and one of their latest realizations is the Grand Egyptian Museum, which was only opened a couple of months ago. I talked to their translation department because their headquarters are in Brussels. They work in 3 languages, Dutch, French, and English. They have in-house translators. They also work with, obviously, part is machine translation and post-editing. But everything that is in relation to security and technical information is translated in every language they need for the workers on a particular plant. And then when they started their marketing campaign in the Arabic world, everything obviously was translated into Arabic with all kinds of marketing and promotion elements. You can have a look at their reports. I also have a reference here. Tourism. Here I took the example of Holland Marketing. The tourism industry in the Netherlands is over 6.7% of the working population. It's not only about holidays and vacation, no, it's about international business. MICE is the short for meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions. So there are a huge number of organized multi-day business trips in the Netherlands. And this, again, provides a job and employment for many people. It's good for economic activity, but there is always an impact on the language and communication process. Then one of my favorites is this example from the medical industry. Medtronic is a huge American-based company, and already in the 1990s they decided language and linguistics and translation is either going to save us or to kill us, because if there is a mistake in one of our manuals, this is highly critical medical equipment. If something goes wrong and a translation is wrong in a particular language, then this might have deadly consequences. So what did they do first? They hired a colleague of mine, Sue Ellen Wright from Kent State University, who helped them to do the source language terminology management. So they looked at the American English, the source language of the company, and everything was then clearly defined, one concept, one term, one definition. So no more confusion in the source language, because that leads to better translation work, obviously, if there are no mistakes or no confusion in the source language. And then they did a terminology management for each of the target languages. And they took into account the opinion of the marketing departments in all the different countries, like in Sweden, what do you use in terminology for this or this concept? So it resulted in a unique database with all the terms and concepts, and this led to clear professional language and instructions. Now that's for the experts. If a surgeon somewhere in Greece or in Sweden or in Finland has to deal with any of these cardiovascular apparatus, then they really have to understand properly what to do. And it's completely fiction to think that their English is that good, that they can understand the English instructions. They need it in their own language. But now something else happens, and that is the right-hand part of the slide. We all have a right to have a look at our own medical records these days. So we are non-experts, but we want to know about our own medical health situation. And this is called mHealth, mobile health. So also the non-expert has to be able to address and understand all these medical questions. If you're diabetic, you can do a number of things and tests yourself, but you have to understand what you're doing. And this is done again with very clear communication. I invite you to look at their website. For example, for the Netherlands and Flanders, they have 3 plants close to Eindhoven. And it's amazing to see how clear and correct the information is in every language you need. And this is obviously crucial in the medical field. Then something else that is quite important and very often forgotten in translators training is that there are so many technical manuals. And there the EU has been very helpful, because for European Union there is a machine directive. It's a legislation that says that a product is only complete if also the manual is there. It's part of the product. And the manual has to be available in every language that is officially spoken in a particular country. Again, a lot of translation work. And this deals with safety and security. So this is a lot of challenges. Again, we need the information in all languages available. And there can be manuals for the user, for the customer, but there are also technical manuals for installation and technical support. You can find the directive in the EURLEX directory. This leads to new training profiles on technical communication. TECOM Germany is the largest technical communication organization in the world, And if you've ever been to one of these conferences, there is a lot of money there going on. TECOM Germany is extremely strong, and that's why we, in Belgium, decided to open TECOM Belgium, and later on also TECOM in the Netherlands got realized. You can have a look at the website technicalcommunication.org, where you find all kinds of information on that. So it's important also to train students in order to do that kind of job, because there are international standards for user manuals and operating instructions. But there is also a group in this TECOM environment to promote universities and educational institutions to work with that and to train students. Then there is the e-commerce domain, obviously the emerging factor. Again, e-commerce is blooming and growing. The Netherlands is leading the way. And we can see that this is heavily influenced by AI. But at the same time, it is clear that the customer wants the information in his or her own language. Very often here also speech technology is included more and more often. But all research proves that at least 75% of the customers, they want websites in their own language and their own valuta. Otherwise, they don't trust it and they won't buy. I have this reference here on CSA, the Common Sense Advisory Committee, and also on the e-commerce statistics for the Netherlands. Now, there are a lot of new trends and new professions emerging. Cultural consultancy, language validation, localization, adaptation, multilingual search engines, transcreation. And what is transcreation? Well, this is a very interesting part of translation work these days, and this is human translation work. Because not only in the yellow part you see excellent knowledge of languages, obviously, excellent knowledge of source and target language. You have to take into account the audience, that's the red part of this design. Which type of audience are you working with? Are you translating for? That we all know. But then the culture comes in, and even emotions come in. The way you sell a car, a particular car brand in Finland, can be completely different from the way you have to present this on the Portuguese market. So it's all about emotion. And you can find lots of that on Hogarth Industries and also on Interlingo, a Dutch translation company. This leads to new professions. Languages are among the top 8 skills required across all occupations. So from healthcare, government, finance, sports, everywhere, everybody is looking for a wide range of professionals with communication skills in multiple languages. So language competency and insight in linguistics can make all the difference. And that's why I'm really happy with this Clarin Upskills project. Some of you may know what Clarin is. Clarin is a research infrastructure, a European research infrastructure. It stands for Common Language Resource Network. So all the language materials are brought together in Europe. Clarin is an ERIC, a European research infrastructure, which has stable money. And my institute in Leiden is a Clarin Institute. So we collect all language materials for Dutch in order to open them up for other users, both companies and researchers. Now, up to now, Clarin had been very busy building an infrastructure for research mainly. But now they started thinking, what about the students? How can we bring Clarin and all these new trends to the students? And that's why they started the project Clarin Upskills. They work together with different universities in Europe, among others University of Bologna, to make a kind of questionnaire and to see what do companies and institutes need these days with all these new elements, with all the big data and all the new technology available. And then they came up with a whole list of new professions. Some are a bit older, some are new, but there are so many linguistic professions that students can deal with, whether it's a language analyst, language engineer, copywriter, language editor, and of course also translation and interpreting is there. So again, very interesting to read more on the clarin.eu website on Clarin Upskills. And this leads to new job profiles. I give one example here. What is a localization manager? Well, it's a person who leads a team. Very often they are translators themselves, they're trained like that. They have linguistic, but also administrative, technical, and cultural knowledge, because you are in charge for a whole team who are going to work together to localize products and the information related to different countries. If a Belgian company wants to come to Hungary and put a product on the market, they have to do their research first and see what is the culture here, what is the environment, what do people like, how can we please them, and so on. So this is the localization aspect. And this leads us to a very important trend, and that is the so-called glocalization. Glocalization is a short or is a combined form from globalization and localization. Companies, first, they draft an international strategy. They want to conquer the world, or they want to go on every market in Europe. That's the international part, or the globalization part. But then they have to start localizing and adapt to local markets. And that means translation, intercultural communication, and adapting to these local situations. I once heard a story about a beautiful Vespa from Italy being sold in Korea, and it was a complete failure. Why? They chose the wrong color. The color was absolutely unacceptable for that market. Yeah, it can happen. So this is the whole globalization aspect. So on the left-hand side, you can see the global low-cost production with low complexity. They design a product. It can basically be on any market. But then on the right-hand side, you can say, you have to give a flexible response to the local customer needs, and you have to be able to penetrate the regional and local markets. And that is a very intricate strategy for a company. And then I come to something completely new, and that is a new type of translation. And that is not the interlingual translation from one language into another, for example, from Hungarian into Dutch. No, this is translating intralingual. You remain within the same language, but you are going to translate a complex text into plain language or easy language. And we have had a look at the Low Countries, the Netherlands and Flanders. The employment rate is extremely high. It is difficult to find new employees for jobs that are still open. So we have to include people who have, for example, a low literacy, who are out of the market, who have to be convinced to find a job, but they don't understand complex instructions, for example. So there is a lot of investment these days in clear communication and simplification of texts. The European Union was one of the first to start a campaign, Fight the Fog, because translators and interpreters wanted to have clear language. Plain language is an obligation for governments and for public services to make the texts they issue to their citizens understandable. That's there for everybody. Easy language is one level below that, is going to the people who have impairments and who have really difficulty reading or have an extremely low literacy. Now, you can read a lot about that. I've added 2 links, one on Rijksoverheid about toegankelijkheid, accessibility of texts, and you can find that basically every government in Europe is doing this. And then the Taalunie has this other obligation to make Dutch texts accessible for everyone. And this is a brand new book. I've brought it with me. It is a book by my very good friend and colleague Lynn Bowker from Université de Laval in Canada. And this book is published this month. It's on plain language for translators, because there is a whole market now on translating within your own language, but from more complex texts into plain texts. And this is a challenge on its own. And she also proves here that this is not something a machine can do. Machines can help, but this is really something the translator specialist should take into account. So what do we need in formation? We need experts in languages and linguistics who are tech savvy, who like a little bit of technology, who embrace alpha and beta sciences. So my question for students then is, do you have an advanced knowledge of source and target languages? Do you have a profound knowledge of the culture and languages you work in and translate into? Do you have some digital literacy, especially in language technology? Do you have curiosity? Do you want to learn more on new and specialized domains? And perhaps the knowledge of language systems might help you to improve language technology and knowledge of AI. So this is what the profile is right now. Is AI the spider in the web? Is it disruptive? What are the implications of using ChatGPT or Claude or any other application these days? Well, the question always will be, do we use technology to make something, to improve something, or to make it worse? The same is with weapons. How do you use the weapon industry? To make it worse or to improve? Humans can use technology to make the world a better place, and this is definitely true also for AI applications. Just one remark on the danger for smaller languages. I could talk for hours on the implications for large language models and technology for small languages. Think about, well, Dutch is quite well served in computational linguistics and AI. Think about Hungarian, think about Maltese, think about Danish, Swedish, and so on, smaller languages. So, in fact, if you want to build these engines, you need a lot of language data. This works perfectly well for English, German, Spanish, French, and so on. But if the language is very small and you have a limited amount of data, then for neural machine translation, you need to build a monolingual corpus. And how this is done then is they use a small parallel corpus, like I said, Hungarian English, and then the model is trained automatically to start and produce a large amount of monolingual data in Hungarian, but that is synthetic language. It's machine-generated language. So there is a real danger that in the end, the large language model doesn't improve anymore because it is not human language, it is machine language. This is my conclusion. The economic impact of language is huge. Language is the ideal vehicle for economic expansion. And language diversity is increasingly important to business. In my book, for example, I write about the UK, where research has been done that they lose an enormous amount of markets because they only have monolingual staff. And not too many people speak other languages. The market needs new language jobs and new profiles. The complex process of localization and transcreation are becoming increasingly necessary. Speech technology will become more important, and many language data have to be made available for every language. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Ja, aan het einde van beide lezingen. Thank you very much, Frida, for this interesting presentation. We will take questions after the second plenary, so please don't forget your questions. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker, Heidi Kotze from Utrecht University. She is a professor of translation studies and head of the Department of Languages, Literature and Communication in Utrecht. And she's also editor of the renowned journal Target. And she's going to talk about translating in the techno scene, the transformation in translator studies. The floor is yours. Megvan.
Sorry, can you please help me? Which was your presentation? What was the title?
I don't see it now. Hang on. It doesn't seem to be there.
Okay.
I have it on the disk. I do. I come prepared. So it's just put a date modified at the top.
This one, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. I feel very honored to speak among so many other speakers whose work I admire so much. So I want to start with a little quote by the American scientist and futurist Roy Amara. He coined the adage that's now known as Amara's law. So we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. So we know already that the language professions are currently in the midst of a period of rapid technological change. This is driven by two things. It's driven by the development of large language models and their application in synthetic text generators like ChatGPT. At roughly the same time, of course, we've had these rapid advances in neural machine translation, similar fast-paced advances with the ascendancy of neural machine translation, likewise making use of neural networks. So these advances, which Bernardini and Gaspari describe as part of the technocene, undoubtedly, we know, have transformational impacts on the practice of translation, the process of translation, the translation profession, the translation industry, the training of translators. And we're seeing a lot of opinion pieces emerging on this. We are starting to see data emerge on this. We're seeing lots of research projects on this topic as well. But really, the empirical effects for the effects of these technological changes on all aspects of translation, and really not just translation, but communication more generally, is really just beginning to emerge. It's really difficult at the moment to estimate whether we are overestimating these effects in the short run or underestimating them in the long run. Now, I said we have lots of research emerging on the impacts of these tools on translation itself. What we have far less of is research on or thinking about how these developments will impact the discipline of translation studies. So here are a couple of recent papers, and as you can see, they're all pretty recent. So it's really only quite recently that people have started thinking about this. There is one exception that I'd like to highlight here, and that's the work of Tomasz Rosmiszowicz, who has commented on this as early as 2014 in his reflections on the relationship between machine translation and translation theory and translation studies as a discipline. And I'm going to come back to his work a couple of times in this talk. So what am I going to do in this talk? I'm going to try to survey a bit the lay of the disciplinary land. So I want to start by looking a bit at some of these recent sources that have reflected on the disciplinary impacts of technology on translation studies. I'm going to look a bit at maps of translation studies, so famous ones. I won't spend too much time on them. And I want to kind of get a feel for how things are changing in the discipline and how people are responding to this from within the discipline. Then I want to propose 4 dimensions in which I think developments in machine translation, large language models, synthetic text generators, AI, may alter the shape of translation studies. And I've put them here as 4 distinct areas, which you can see on the slide there. But actually, the more I've been thinking about this, the more I realized that the first 3 are actually more or less part of the same development. So I'm going to come back to that as well. And then lastly, I want to draw some conclusions. And I want to end, if I have time, with a bit of a postscript on mapping exercises, and particularly how we can map uncertainty. So Romy Asher has pointed out the growing disjuncture between practices of translation and theoretical frameworks in translation studies. So he has pointed out, like many others have, that the majority of translation that is now produced is actually produced by machine translation or some sort of technological intervention, but still really influential theoretical frameworks in the discipline and also meta-analyses of such frameworks, so the sorts of things that we see in maps, continue to take human translation as their conceptual point of departure. So I've already said that Tomasz Rosmiszowicz has written extensively on this matter, and he's actually argued that the kind of disciplinary origin stories of translation studies, or the myth history, as Brian Bear has called it, has kind of come to elide the fact that really translation studies actually emerged out of the technological project of machine translation. And so the disciplinary history, origin stories have kind of pushed this a bit into the background instead to create a disciplinary identity of translation studies as human translation studies. So it's kind of relegated machine translation and automation to a sort of a minor domain in the discipline, or kind of eliding it altogether. And I have a quite long quote here by Romishowicz, which I won't read in detail, but I really like the way that he formulates it here. He kind of says that now that machine translation has become really ubiquitous, not just for translators, but in everyday life for everyone, it's become taken for granted in our social life. This kind of basic orientation and self-understanding of translation studies is kind of beginning to crumble under our feet as we speak. So human translation studies is kind of being put under empirical pressure by the realities of machine translation. So he says, the rise and the spread of translating machines is not simply a technological development befalling this discipline out of nowhere. Rather it is, and I really like this formulation, the empirical return of the theoretically repressed. So translation studies emerged out of the technological project of machine translation and gained its disciplinary autonomy by reinventing it as human translation studies and kind of excluding machine translation from its purview. And this is what is at stake now. So in a way, we're kind of at a moment of, what's maybe a bit too strong, but it's sort of like a moment of disciplinary self-reckoning. So the kind of distance between our disciplinary maps, and here I refer to kind of formalized maps of the kind that I'll show you just now, but also maps that are just our shared understanding of what the discipline is like. The distance between these maps and the realities of translation, that's kind of getting bigger and bigger. And we have a sense that the lay of the land is shifting underfoot in real time in ways that cause us to question our maps. Now, this is where I get into my first digression about mapping. We always know, of course, that the map is not the territory. But it's more than that. It's not just that maps cannot really adequately represent the world, right? Or a disciplinary map doesn't adequately represent what the discipline is. The issue is more fundamental. So if you look at the work in critical cartography, some people argue that maps are not just representational instruments, they are propositional instruments, right? So maps are, and I quote here Wood, systems of propositions, where a proposition is nothing more than a statement that affirms or denies the existence of something. So maps are like arguments about existence. So in areas of critical cartography, what cartographers have looked at, what researchers have looked at, is how, for example, maps have been used as tools in the construction of nation states. So in claiming and demarcating territory and ownership. So also as tools for creating imagined communities in Anderson's sense. So maps are really fundamentally about power and about ideology. So these are geographical maps, but we can say a lot the same things about disciplinary maps. So we think that they're an aid to help us to navigate the discipline, but really they in a way create the territory. And they create the territory in ways that reflect and bolster the interests of particular groups of people. So they advance propositions, they make arguments, they propose the existence of things. And Anthony Pym has written about this, sort of saying that maps are peculiar instruments of power. They tend to make you look in certain directions and they make you overlook other directions. So if we look at influential disciplinary maps in translation studies, how do they guide our looking at technology? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because maybe many of you know these maps already. So very briefly, we look at these really influential mapping exercises in translation studies. We start with Holmes's map from 1988, later developed by Turi. Or if we look at Monday et al.'s sort of expansion of the map to kind of develop the applied side more, or if we look at Andrew Chesterton's map of translator studies, what we really take away from this is that by and large, the conceptual maps of translation studies kind of take human translation as a point of departure. So technology is conceptually included in the maps, but it's mostly in relation to applied matters. So things like work environment and training and use of tools and resources. It does appear on the theoretical side in Holmes's original map, but as a kind of a detail. And that theoretical dimension has never really developed, I think. So there are basically two reasons for this, right? We could say on the one hand, why don't we see technology much more strongly on these disciplinary maps? Well, maybe it was just that technology wasn't that important at the time. That's the obvious explanation. But another explanation might indeed be what Rosmichowicz argues, that this omission is part of the way in which the disciplinary territory of translation studies was constructed. So it was a kind of a way to create an imagined community of translation studies. And this is a process shaped by a complex web of sociological and political and ideological factors. So in this view, the general marginalization of translation studies can be explained largely as a consequence of the foregrounding of particular intellectual interests or claims in the discipline. So we can think here, for example, of the establishment of the so-called cultural turn in reaction against the perceived limitations of the linguistic paradigm in translation studies, or we can think of claims in favor of a hermeneutic view of translation against an instrumentalist one. Again, a longer quote here from Rosmichowicz, which I won't read in detail, but his point is that the very idea of machine translation represents those epistemological and methodological premises that translation studies has rejected since its departure from a mere linguistic approach and its integration into general constructivist and culturalist currents of thinking. So this is a bit of the background that I want to sketch about why I think our maps look the way they are. We are sort of standing at a point where deep reflection, I think, is coming from within the discipline. And in the next part of my argument, I want to look a little bit about what responses there have been to this kind of moment of disciplinary introspection. And I have, sorry, my diagram has not quite turned out the way that it's supposed to be. There's supposed to be like a little Venn diagram with circles partially overlapping. So I have kind of grouped these responses into three sets. I see them as distinctive, but they also overlap, right? So that's really important. They are not separate kind of responses, but they do have different points of departure. So the first group of scholars kind of proposed to capture this change as a paradigm change. So yet another turn in translation studies. So Jimenez Crespo has made the argument that the technological turn in translation studies has already been accomplished, not by theorization, but just because technology is everywhere in what we study and also how we study it. Very recently, Bogutsky has made the claim for a Gen AI turn in translation studies. Now, we can talk a lot about what these turns really are. You know, are they fashions? Are they paradigms? Are they? But in terms of my discussion earlier of maps, we can also see these turns, claims of turns as an attempt at map making, right? A way of claiming or staking a particular territory in the discipline. So I'm not going to get into that too much right now, but I think what is interesting here is that in these proposals for a new turn, what you see is some comments on the importance of the need for new theories, but it doesn't really go very far in those theorizations. So other proposals, like that of Asher, kind of really try to work from within the established theoretical paradigms in translation studies. So for Asher, the primary problem is consilience. So how can we find the right theoretical frameworks in translation studies to kind of match the new realities of translation in the world out there? And so what he does in his 2024 paper and also in the recent book from 2025 is to kind of go through all of the accepted theories and paradigms in translation studies,
like Scopus theory and post-structuralist approaches, and sort of to say that they don't really fit these realities. But the framework that does fit is that of descriptive translation studies, as in the work of Tori. And he uses concepts there. He uses concepts of norms, and equivalence, and target-orientedness as showing sufficient overlap, theoretically, and in these empirical realities of machine translation. But interestingly, he doesn't really question these concepts. So the concept of norms, of target-orientedness, kind of remains intact in a way. The last group of scholars go further. So they really see the rise of technology in the translation studies as an opportunity to question concepts. And a lot of this work focuses on fundamental concepts in translation, like translation and interpreting. So a lot of scholars are reflecting on questions like, is machine translation translation? Is machine interpreting interpreting? But there are also other reflections. So people who are using the rise of technology as a prompt to also ask questions about other concepts, like agency, for example, or culture, even. So what we then basically are saying is that well, this is kind of the bridge to the second part of my talk, which is kind of looking at how the rise of technology will potentially reshape translation studies. And I want to start then with this conceptual issue. So this last group of scholars who are looking at fundamental concepts, I think this is one of the big areas in which we can expect a change in translation studies, rethinking our concepts. So, as is the case in all disciplines, translation studies kind of evolves through periods of introduction and acceptance and contestation of new concepts. And some of these concepts come from within the discipline, and others are kind of imported from outside. Now, these concepts, it's almost inevitable that they kind of become like reusables, reified reusables in a discipline. So people start using the concepts without really thinking about what they mean. So why do we do that? Well, in one way, it's just like a disciplinary shorthand, right? We know what we're talking about when we talk about norms, for example, in translation studies. In another way, it's also a way of showing your disciplinary affiliations and identities, right? So if you're talking about cognitive load, for example, or you are talking about function or ethics, you know which kind of group of scholars you belong to in the discipline. Now, these concepts are important, they're useful, they're essential, but they sometimes become reified. And elsewhere, I have referred to this as potential zombie concepts or zombie categories. And this is a notion that comes from the sociologist Ulrich Beck, and he describes it as living dead categories which govern our thinking but are not really able to capture the contemporary milieu. They persist. Why do they persist? Well, because they help to give people a sense of disciplinary identity. So I think what will happen is that the ubiquity of large language models and neural machine translation is going to prompt an unavoidable rethinking of some concepts in translation studies, zombie concepts or otherwise. And one fundamental concept, I think, that is going to prompt us to rethink is that of language. So, and together with that, also the role of linguistic theorization in translation studies. So I agree with the arguments of Rosmichowicz that the elision of machine translation from the disciplinary history and identity of translation studies is in part a consequence of the rejection of early linguistic views of translation, which were kind of premised on the notion of language as a code. It was really linked to generativist linguistic theorization that was prominent at the time. And so that was kind of pushed into the background of translation studies, and while it has remained alive, like linguistic approaches certainly remained alive in some parts of the discipline, a lot of the time what you hear translation scholars saying is that, well, linguistic theories are not useful because a translation is more than mere linguistic transfer, right? So that's kind of a stock phrase that you hear all the time. And one of the things that, and this has sort of led to a resistance against linguistic theorization in translation. And one of the things that, that I've argued together with Sandra Halverson is that what these sorts of phrases often reveal is a particular idea about language. So if you say that translation is more than mere linguistic transfer, what do you think that language is, right? I think then that language and linguistics has kind of become a zombie concept in translation studies, like a casualty of the earlier turns in the discipline that sort of weakened disciplinary links between translation studies and linguistics. So the rise of large language models, neuro-machine translation, doesn't just take us back to the question of what is translation, it actually takes us back to the question of language. And I think it will become an important area of research in the coming years. Now, how this is going to play out, or if it's going to play out, that remains to be seen. But whatever shape it will take, it will not be a return to the old linguistic roots of translation studies. And I kind of want to make two important points here. The one is that this is also an ongoing debate in linguistics, right? So how do large language models and synthetic text generators relate to linguistic theorization? Like, what is human about language? And in this debate, you also see playing out these different positions about what language is, right? A more generativist sort of approach, often against more social cognitive and emergentist approaches to language. Whatever shape the future interfaces between translation studies and linguistics will take, I think it will call for linguistic theories that are fundamentally social cognitive and emergentist in nature. So linguistic approaches that allow for the comparison of human language and human translation with various forms of technologically mediated language production. This is exciting, I think. Why is it exciting? Well, it allows us to use, within a coherent theoretical framework, it allows us to compare human and synthetic language to kind of get closer to understanding language. So it's not just about understanding translation. This is a way in which studying translation of different kinds, human, machine, can contribute to the general understanding of what language is. And so I think it can actually contribute to the broader research interests and projects of linguistic research that is moving in the direction of trying to understand what is human and communicative and coordinating and intersubjective, what is socially embedded about translation and language beyond what is purely computational and algorithmic. So what makes human language more than mere stochastic parroting, to quote Bender et al. So I talked a bit at length about this first impact on the discipline of translation studies. The last three I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. The second point is that I think that the rise of large language models, synthetic text generators, is going to expand the area of translation sociology considerably. So this was already commented on by a number of people, for example, Loránd in 2019. So what the rise of neural machine translation and LLMs, what this is doing, it's kind of reconfiguring how we think about agency in translation, right? So it raises questions like, who is the translator? Because already what we're seeing is a shift away from research focusing purely on translators, professional translators or paraprofessional translators, and their interactions with technology, to how people in general are using translation technologies in their everyday life. And the question is, who initiates these translation events with technology in various forms? who are behind these translation events, who uses these translation products, in what ways. And this, I think, is one of the big ways in which the rise of neural machine translation and its embedding across all levels of communication, social media, and elsewhere, how this is altering the discipline of translation studies. So I think what we will see is more interfaces between translation and multilingual and intercultural communication, and a move from the sociology of translators and their profession and practice to a sociology of translating as an activity carried out by lots of different people in their everyday life. But this then takes us back to questions of what translation and interpreting actually is. So we get back again to that fundamental question. And here I think the fundamental concept that we're going to question is that of agency. Another fundamental concept, I think, is that of ethics. So if you go back to, let's say, some of the big works in translation ethics, so you look at PIM in 2012, there's hardly any mention of machine translation. And the same goes, in fact, for many codes of ethics, professional codes of ethics, which deal with machine translation only sporadically and inconsistently. And in a way, this is not surprising, right? Because if we are thinking of translation as human to begin with, then ethics is also part of the human domain. But we are absolutely seeing, if we look at recent work, an expansion of this territory. And I think we see two areas. So we see work focusing on ethical issues in the development of machine translation, large language models, synthetic text generators, AI in general. And here we have the things that we are all aware of in terms of ethics. So things like the ethics of using existing language data, exploitative labor practices, environmental impacts, algorithmic bias, the propagation of linguistic inequality and injustice. We also see work on ethical issues in the use of these tools. So cases where the inappropriate uses of these tools, and that can be malicious or it can be inadvertent, may contribute to disinformation and do harm to people. And right now, I think a lot of these issues are kind of pushed to the corner of machine translation, but increasingly, these issues will become less the concerns of machine translation only, but it's going to continue to expand the scope of ethics in translation. And I think we're going to look more and more at translation and technology as kind of really embedded in social and linguistic ecologies. So there's another zombie concept that I think is going to be questioned in the coming years. The last point I'm not going to talk about in detail because I am almost out of time. And that's the question of how we're going to use AI in our research. And there are lots of interesting issues, important issues happening here. So questions of how we can use large language models and various AI tools in collecting data, in processing data. So for example, collecting corpus data, cleaning up corpus data, annotating corpus data. Also using these in analysis, so tools that automate parts of the analytical process. This is increasingly happening. We see more and more of these tools integrated in standalone corpus tools, for example. There's been a recent survey by Lee in 2025 who looks at research considering the efficacy, the efficiency of these tools, and the picture is really mixed, right? So sometimes LLMs do fine, for example, with annotation tasks, and sometimes they don't. But there are real issues with, for example, replicability. So often you don't get the same result when you ask the LLM to do the same task twice. And of course, there are issues with transparency. And plus, we have all of these ethical issues that I mentioned in the previous slide. And then, you end up with the question of whether, given the questionable gains of using these tools for research, plus the ethical concerns, whether on balance it's really worth it. There's also the question of using these tools for writing up our research, so not just doing it, but also writing. So using ChatGPT to help you write your literature review or to improve your writing. As a journal editor, this is something that journals are coming up against more and more frequently, and is going to become a huge issue in future. But I will not talk about that any further because I want to wrap up. So I started by talking a bit about Amara's law. So we overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate its effect in the long run. And I think what is very clear that until very recently, we have absolutely underestimated the effects of technology on the theorization of translation. So these rapid developments in large language models, neural machine translation, and so on, yes, there is to some degree, new territories in the discipline, but also in other ways, these developments kind of just bring to the surface some aspects of the disciplinary developments in translation studies that have kind of been suppressed for a long time. And this is going to, I think, be a prompt for reconsidering some fundamental concepts, zombie concepts or otherwise. Now I want to conclude, because I talked a bit about mapping in this presentation, so I want to talk a bit about mapping again at the end. So as I was working on this presentation, I thought, well, what do cartographers actually do when they're uncertain about the territory that they are mapping? And so I read a bit of the work by a historian of cartography, Chet van Duzer, who looked at how uncertainty was dealt with by cartographers in the early modern period. And he finds that, well, actually, in this period, most cartographers kind of just preferred not to let their uncertainty show. So they didn't want to call their credibility in question, so they just kind of confidently went ahead and mapped the territory. But at other times, early modern cartographers actually do indicate their uncertainty, and they do this in different ways. So sometimes they decline to map certain regions, so they just kind of leave them blank on the map. At other times, they put little symbols to show this is an area that I'm sure of, and this is an area that I'm not sure of. Sometimes they put really elaborate frames over the parts, decorative entities over the parts that they're unsure of. And he links that also to the notion of the horror vacui in map making. So a discomfort at leaving empty spaces, a resultant desire to place text or images in all parts of the map. What does this have to do with translation studies? Well, the territories of translation and translation studies are changing, as they always have. So let's be clear about that. The change is not new. It's always been changing. But times of accelerated change often kind of prompt a flurry of mapping. So a call for new turns or new maps. So attempts to chart and maybe even steer the way that a discipline is looking. And as useful as such reflections are, I think that confident proclamations of turns do need to be tempered a bit by the awareness that the cartographer's confidence might actually conceal considerable uncertainties about the territory. And these frames that we put around our maps and these ever-expanding territories of translation are also maybe a reflection of our own uncertainty about the kind of diffuse edges of things. And so perhaps what we don't need new maps or more maps. Maybe we don't need the declamation of new turns. They're useful, they help to orient us. But I think more important is an awareness of the complexity of the territory that we find ourselves in, courage to acknowledge that there are uncharted spaces on our maps, a willingness to explore it from lots of different perspectives, even perspectives that we might not agree with. And above all, I think a critical look at the conceptual tools that we are using to navigate this territory. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I hope we have some mobile microphones in the room. Yes, I can already see one. So we can bring it to people who have a question, and you can also use the microphone when you're giving your answers. Okay. Dear audience, we have some time for questions. So just please put your hand up, and our young colleague will take the microphone to you, and you can ask your questions. Yes, Heltai Pali here. Please speak into the microphone because the interpreters have to. Thank you.
Among the zombie concepts, you didn't mention process of translation. What about the process of translation?
Yeah, sorry. That's a really good point. So you mentioned that one of the zombie concepts might be process. And indeed, when we think of the translation process, we tend to, well, at least from the tradition of process-oriented studies, it's human, and then possibly with technology added into it at some point. But you're absolutely correct that that is one of the fundamental concepts that also opens up to scrutiny. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Kaisa.
Yes, thank you for both. I actually would have a question for both, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed. So I start by asking my question to the first presenter. So thank you very much for the overview. The thing that I was most surprised by was not, it was only indirectly translation related, and that was the point that you mentioned about language skills being among the top 8 of expected competencies for any professional skills. Now, coming from Finland, where language learning has been going down for quite some time already, both in terms of what parents choose, what schools offer, and so I don't think people have this understanding when they are making life choices early on, and this obviously affects also professional translation side. So where do we get our professional translators, interpreters, and on the other hand, they will be badly in demand when this is declining. So is Finland an outlier, or are they somehow sort of missing the point on what would need to be happening? Thank you.
No, there are two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, multilingualism is highly appreciated in many parts of the world, but indeed there is a decline in some countries as to definitely, yeah, people don't want to study particular languages anymore, or this is going down in a certain rate. And the other point is obviously there is this issue of perception, because now when you open your emails, you have this button that says translate immediately. We think, oh, it's all there, we don't need to do anything anymore. So it is also an issue that students are not really encouraged to start language studies anymore, because everything seems like automated these days. There are some trends where it is going down indeed, but in the end it is also our duty, I think, to explain to people that there is also the other side of the medal, that language professions are still very important, and that we need perhaps also a shift in the paradigm there, but that we absolutely need multilingual people. But it is the perception that is a little bit against us. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, there's one over there, Esther.
I have a bit of a question to the second presenter, and I apologize if it betrays the fact that I'm just a student of translation studies. Lately, I have been I've been using computer-assisted translation software, and I think it is clear that the application of so-called CAT tools is are quite different in its impacts to machine translations, especially the spread of large language models and such technologies. And I think part of this is that in some translators' perception, or in many language users' perception, machine translation and large language models are seen as something that undermines professional skills or the expertise of a translator. So do you believe that many translators, professionals and scholars are uncertain of including machine translation and large language models to such an extent because they feel threatened by the possible inclusion of these technologies in the territory?
Esther, are you directing your questions to one of the presenters particularly, or is it in general to both of them? Second, okay, sorry.
Well, thank you for the...
Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think I will. I think Frida has something to say about this as well. So, all right. I think that's a...
No, please speak into the microphone or don't speak, okay? Because the interpreters won't hear you, Esther.
Thank you for the question. I think that there is that perception, certainly, and there is also quite a lot of research looking at the perceptions of translators, whether they trust machine translation and CAT tools to a lesser degree. So I think that that experience is definitely there, and most professional translators certainly find machine translation a threat, or certainly an inferior way of translating to human translation. I don't know, does that answer your question?
I think she's nodding, yes.
Okay. I do want to add, I give to Frida.
That's okay. There has been a long tradition of ignoring translation technology for many translators. When I started my career, if I only uttered the word machine translation in the 80s or 90s, I was like banned from the department because they really hated it. CAT tools is something different because there I always taught CAT tools with the idea the translator is still the boss. You decide how to use the CAT tool in your translation work. Obviously, it hasn't been easy because many expensive tools also have a new version every year, which is expensive to buy, and then you need to adapt to get all these new features and you know, buttons to work. So this is also not, not a way the translator really loves to work with this technology. Between 2014 and 2018, we did a research project called SCATE. This was Smart Translation Environment. And we indeed questioned translators, why don't you like, for example, terminology management? What is wrong with a terminology or a translation database and so on, or a translation memory? And so we try to improve these tools in order to make it work for many people. For many people, it is still a bit strange, and indeed, many people don't like it. Many people also still think that machine translation is an inferior way of translation. I could also agree with that, but the fact is that there are so many texts to be translated in our multilingual worldwide society that we need a machine to help us out here and there. And it also is the question of what is the quality you want to get out of it. Is it pure information gisting, or is it for publication? Another thing is the translation studies, because also there, the appreciation for technology only came later. And now we see that this is the process that is changing, but this is also quite new, I think.
Thank you very much. And thank you for these introductory presentations. I think it is time for the first coffee break now. We have really deserved it. So please go to the other end of the room, and there you can find coffee and refreshments. is also from the Netherlands. Her name is Marleen Hof, and she's an education innovator, a lecturer in translation, and she comes from the ITV University of Applied Sciences, Utrecht, and she's going to talk about a skills lab they are running there, where students learn how to become a successful translator or interpreter. I think that's all we want, so the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, my thanks to Reka for inviting me to speak here today. It's an honor to be here. My name is Marleen Hof. I'm the head of professionalism at Capabel Hogeschool. That's a University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, and we provide a 4-year bachelor program to get your bachelor degree in translation and interpreting. I've heard there's a lot of students and alumni in the audience. Could you please raise your hand? Yeah. Oh, they're all in the back down there. I've got a question for you guys. When you first started as a translator or interpreter, did you feel prepared for your first job? That might be the work placement or internship, but that might be your first real job in the work field after you finished your studies. May I see the people that think, yes, I was prepared? May I see some hands? Yeah, just one? So that means there's a lot of no's coming up now. May I see the no hands, please? Who did not feel prepared? Not anyone? Oh, right, so I can go now again, and you don't need my talk. Okay. Well, the thing is, we asked this question to our students 6 years ago, and they said, yes, we feel prepared with regards to the translation and interpreting skills, but no, they did not feel prepared with regards to the other skills a translator or interpreter needs, so the so-called soft skills and entrepreneur skills. So what to do then? So we invited our skills lab, which is a simulated translation bureau. And in this skills lab, students work together for a whole year. It's a part-time course, but they work together for a whole year on a project. And they learn everything they need to know about running a real business. So that sounds quite exciting, which it is. And what do they learn within this skills lab? Well, actually, all of these skills you see right here on the slide. And I will go quickly through them, through all of them. First of all, collaboration. Like I said, students work in a group. The very first lesson they come to my class, I come in with a bottle of champagne and a couple of glasses, and I say, congratulations, you just started a new company. So pop the corks, it's time to party. Well, some of these students look at me quite frightened, like a deer in the headlights, and they think, oh my gosh, what's happening here? Well, what they do, they work within their own student company, and they've got different roles. Obviously, they're all translator and reviewer, but then they can choose one or two of the others, like project management, translation technology, and we work with MemoQ as a CAT tool. You need a webmaster because you need a website when you want to start a company. We need content creators, we need account managers that have contact with real clients. I'll talk about that later. And obviously we've got a financial specialist because you need to know a little about bookkeeping as well. So the very first thing after they came over the shock and had a sip of champagne, what do? Well, they started a company, so they need a company name and they need to know something about branding. well, they've done a bit of self-study at home already before they come together. And, well, they start discussing what would be the company name, what would be the logo, what is the tone of voice? Are we a more formal company or are we a more informal company? What's our target audience or target clients we want to attract with our company? We have to think about color schemes. We have to think about pricing, about our competitors. What do they do? So there's quite a lot of preparation before you actually can start this company. And what do they come up with then? Well, here's an example. As you can see here, it's in Dutch, but I will translate that for the people who don't understand Dutch. This year, one of the student companies is called Lexi. They're a translation and advice bureau. And they've got some reasoning that Lexi comes from the word of lexicon. So that's why they've chosen the name Lexi. And their logo features a flamingo. And that's an exotic animal, so that's why they've chosen an exotic color scheme as well. So they're a bit a hip company, informal, new, young, enthusiastic company. And the flamingo also is a symbol for resilience and uniqueness. Well, that's basically everything a new company or startup needs, but also what a freelancer needs. So, well, this is quite great. Obviously, they might have used AI to generate this, but then still they have to discuss why they do this, because they have to stick to it with a whole year, and everybody within the group needs to agree. So AI might be a nice tool to come up with this idea, but then still you need to process all the rest of it yourself. So basically the whole skills lab is about human intelligence, which is great. So you've got your company, well, started up. And then we brought in 2 clients. This year we work with the Library of Alexandria. It's a very interesting startup in the Netherlands. And they've built a ChatGPT-based tool that you can use within an academic course software like Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle. And students can actually communicate with this tool to basically to have it ask them exam questions, for instance, about certain stuff. The thing is, you can talk to this or chat with this tool in your own language. But then the course material that the teacher has posted in Canvas or in your software, that might be in a different language. So what our students did is they got the prompt that Alexandria is using for their translation bit, and they've played around with it to improve the translation of this tool. So that's quite a technical task, and one of the new emerging things that, well, that's happening for new translators. Then we've got a different client as well, which is Buka Buka. Well, we've heard from our ambassador already that he spoke Dutch to his children and his wife spoke Romanian to his children. The nice thing about Buka Buka is you have illustrated children's book and they're multilingual. So you can read the same story, for instance, in Dutch and Romanian. So it's a lovely app. And our students are providing this app with new translations. So there's more languages available. So that's quite a different kind of client. So we got 2 different clients, 2 different persons, different ways you have to communicate with these clients to get the best out of it as a language service provider. And I, as a teacher, I read all the emails in CC, and I read all the email going on, and I assist them like, oh, you can upsell a little bit here, or you can maybe tweak your communication there to get a better result. Sometimes students don't dare to ask clients what the assignment is, and I say, just ask them for clarification. Oh, well, that's some students think that's quite scary, but they can do that. So that's how we actually guide them in this client communication. Then you have project management. For project management, we teach them a bit about leadership, about planning a project. Right now, we don't have a tool yet for that, but next year I want to incorporate phrase as a translation project tool, but that's some nice to have for next year. Then we work with CAT tools. Our CAT tool we have student licenses for is MemoQ. Students learn already to work with MemoQ in different classes as well, like ICT classes, translation classes, but in the skills lab we actually teach them the more advanced functions of MemoQ. So we upgrade their skills there as well. Then you got bookkeeping, which that's the role everybody is dreading, to be honest. Nobody likes bookkeeping in the translation world. But we've got a lovely software for that. It's an ebookhouden.nl, which is bookkeeping software. Our students learn how to make invoices. They learn how to make a balance for what the money that comes in, the money that comes out. And at the end of the year, they have to present us with a balance of the first year of business. How did it go? Did they make any profits? And where they can improve that. Then we've got a website. To make a website from scratch, that's a bit too much to ask from our students. So what we do is we provide them a template website in WordPress, and they can tweak it however they like. Well, this is an example of last year. We had a company that was called Green Globe Lingo, and they were a niche translation company that translated for just only for ecotourism. So as you can see here, they've got this nice green globe. That's their logo. You can see that on the top there's the Dutch flag with Dutch. They actually make multilingual websites. So this one was actually in Dutch, German, Italian, Russian, everything like that. Well, they need to do that in WordPress as well. They use a plugin for that. And as you can see, this is a screenshot from a mobile phone, so these websites are adaptive as well for multiple types of screens. So it's quite advanced. Then we come to marketing strategy. Well, marketing for a freelancer or a translation company is obviously key to get clients. And what we do is we have some guest lectures from marketing experts. They've got self-study materials, and I'll just give you one example, but one of the marketing theories is this one, the touch, tell, sell strategy. But they can pick and choose whatever marketing strategy they like, but we give them the information so they can make an informed decision about that. And then they can adjust their marketing communication. Like, for instance, if you're posting something on LinkedIn, you need different type of post, different type of language than it would be on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So we talk about that as well. So the social media influence. And then they've done all this. They've worked together for a whole year. It's hard work. And then they can actually present what they've done all year at the end in a pitch. And we have a proper Dragon's Den. And this is a picture from last year. You can see the project manager of Green Globe Lingo. He's presenting this pitch, and his webmaster is assisting him. In the front you see the audience, which are students and teachers from our institution. And on the right, a couple of people there, those are the dragons. That are actually 2 teachers and 3 students from a different institution that have their own skills lab. And they were dragons. They hand out money at the end to invest in this company or not. And then we have a winner, which is a bit of gamification of our education program, because there's one company that gets in the most money from the dragons. And that's always a very nice and a bit of a show at the end of the year. But then the most important thing for us as an education institution is obviously the self-reflection. Well, the things our students come back with is they love to have a safe environment to well, try out these new skills. If you're a bit of a shy person and you suddenly need to chair a meeting, that's quite scary. But they do it. They make their first podcast, they make their first vlogs, they do all kinds of things. And they feel safe enough to do that. They feel safe enough to fail, maybe. That's always a bit of a scary thing with young people. They don't like failing. But I always say, fail as much as you can, otherwise I can't teach you anything. So, but they feel safe enough to do all that, and it's working out great. And after the Skills Lab, students feel more confident to start their work placement or internship, and they have a better insight in what's required of a language professional. Students appreciate that they can choose their own role. Sometimes they can already make a website, so they can choose a different role, so there's something in it for everybody. They say Skills Lab is hard work, but it's always also a lot of fun, because they do a lot themselves. I'm only a bit of a guide, giving a nudge and a push here and there, but most of the hard work, they're doing it themselves. Well, they recognize the importance of working together. Sometimes you think a freelancer, you can sit on your own at home and do your translation work. Well, that's not how it works anymore. If you work for big platforms like Google or Booking.com or LinkedIn, you all have to work in teams. Those are remote teams, but you still have to work with colleagues. And a freelancer is not a loner anymore in these days. And the last thing they really appreciate is that we work with a lot of partners and we give guest lectures and that kind of stuff. So they actually are in touch with the work field. And all the work they do for the 2 clients this year, it's going to be used in the real life practice. So that's very exciting. Well, I'm not an academic, I don't do research. Luckily, we are connected with the international network of simulated translation bureaus. There's a lot of, we are not the only Skills Lab in Europe. We are connected with this network, and we come together twice a year, and we exchange ideas and knowledge about this. So if you want to check out this website, most of the partners do their own academic research as well, and you can read about that on this website. And it's very interesting. So that's me. If you have any questions about this type of lectures, or if you want to try this at your own institution, or students, if you want to know more about entrepreneurship skills, just send me an email if you like, but I will be around here until Friday as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marleen, and please keep your questions until the end of this session, but do not forget them. Because we have the next speaker coming up, Pilar Sanchez-Guion, who is a professor of translation technologies at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And she's going to talk about building technological literacy in translation. And she is also the chief editor of Revista Tradumatica, the journal.
At the desktop. It's directly at the desktop. I want no, it's not this one. This one. No, that's not either. Oh, what is it? Oh my God.
This one?
No, it has my name. This has. It should have my name. Okay, can I go there?
This one, maybe?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, see, it was just not on the desktop. No problem.
Okay, that's
Doesn't
great.
matter.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much for having me. Oh, I feel so small here. I am small indeed. Thank you very much for having me, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to meet all these wonderful colleagues that I've been learning already so much this morning. I think I will leave this here. All right. I'll be talking today about technological literacy. We're in the year of the skills, the European Year of Skills, so I will be talking a bit about skills. This presentation, if I don't skip some of the slides, it will be very long, so I won't show them all, but you will be able to download them all. In the end, you will find a QR and you will be able to download them all. So don't worry about that, you will have all the details. Skills, if we talk about competencies and technology, of course, and translation, we have to pay some attention to the European Masters of Translation framework, which is being revised right now. You already are familiar with that. I won't stop here. Yeah, we've got several categories of skills. Particularly, technology is relevant for the aim of this presentation, and these are the competencies within the European, the EMT framework. Now, what you've got now, oh, I thought I had translated that, sorry. It's in Spanish, but I think it's quite easy to understand. This is our own framework. We've been working on this framework since 1999. This is a technological framework we apply in our masters. Our masters on translation technologies is thought to be or to cover all technological needs from all kinds of translators, sorry. Those who are engaged in the industry, but also those who have direct clients and whose outputs, the products they translate might not be technologically difficult. So all the requirements, all the steps that they have to follow. It's written in Catalan, by the way, and AI is quite useful to understand this kind of far languages for you. Right now, we are conducting this project. I'm leading this project with these wonderful colleagues from these universities. We are paying attention here to how to acquire these new skills, these new, well, how to do what we already did, but with the technology that is right now mastering our landscape. Within this project, we conducted, first of all, we decided to conduct a series of interviews with stakeholders of the landscape, academical stakeholders from the industry, translators from all kinds of translation modalities. All these interviews are published and are available through the web of our project, but we also summarized the information they gave us through the interviews in this report. This report contains a map, and this map is thought to be the map of skills that are required from the technological point of view in the translation world right now, not only in the translation industry. So, of course, it's a big one. It's, as you will see, these are the first three branches, and these branches, you will have all the slides. You don't need to take pictures if you want. These branches are the same branches that the ISO standards have. So they start from pre-production, production, and post-production processes. But then we move to tasks. And when we've got the tasks, we define, or better said, we link the skills the stakeholders mentioned according to those tasks. That's the main point for me, because here you will see, we will go through some of them, we won't go through all of them because it would be, as I said, too long. But for me, the most important thing here is to have the association, the link between the task and the skill, because that means that we can go the other way around and see that skill to what tasks is required, in what tasks it is required. So let me go start by the beginning. This is, for instance, one of the pictures that you may see if you go into details in this map. We've got the pre-production phase. Particularly pre-production phase, it's important. What we concluded after doing this map is here is where the translators' tasks have grown a lot. There is a lot of room for translators in preparing the project, because the project execution as such sometimes, many times, is assumed by automated processors or tools. So we've got, for instance, inquiry and feasibility. We need to carry out some data analysis and linguistic analysis and the analysis of the formats of the files involved in the project. And for that, we need some skills. Basic skills like the use of an Office, Open Office, Microsoft Office, whatever, but also basic Python or not so basic Python. It depends on how deep we get into that task. So you will see that some skills here are repeated from task to task because they are transversal, while other skills are only mentioned in particular tasks. In the pre-production phase, we've got the inquiry and feasibility task, the quotation task, let me go back, the client TSP agreement preparation, which stakeholders said that translators need to master as well. It's not just a task for a company, it's also the task that translators need to know how to carry out. How to handle project-related client information. Here, in particular, things like confidentiality are important, which are very close to ethical issues, but also how to guarantee that confidentiality, which is quite technical, how if we are working on a local server, on our local computer, on a cloud that we are not really aware of the conditions in which documentation is saved, things like that, yeah? And finally, what I think it's the task in which translators have a lot of room to grow, which is the project preparation. Here we have things from administrative activities, project registration, project assignment. These are basics, you already know. But also things like preparing the linguistic specifications. Here it caught our attention a lot that the stakeholders expected translators to be able to work with style guides, but also to prepare style guides, which is something that we don't really used to do at least in our translation courses. And of course, particularly pre-editing was also one of the skills, one of the tasks that seem to be demanded right now. It is not on how to translate a text, it is on how to modify a source text to make it more easy to be translated by a machine or easy to be translated to several foreign languages. So both approaches were here relevant. And also terminology, it's gaining a lot of attention, terminology, because it constrains the way we use LLMs and NMTs as well. And of course, technical aspects of the project preparation, which is basically generating, creating, modifying, optimizing all the resources we might be wanting to use during the project execution. All right, this is, well, I also included this slide here because it talks particularly about GenAI. These interviews were conducted in spring 2024. At that time, GenAI was already attracting a lot of attention from the side of the language and the translation industry in particular. All right, if we move to the production process, when the text is being translated, they identified these several tasks, translating, checking, which means making sure that the translation was done properly, that's all. Revision, review, and proofreading. So that's basically what we teach in our degrees, at least in my context. So we teach languages and cultures and all the information, the factual knowledge that we need to understand a source text and to create a target text, and also what translation means. It's involved, or it's represented here in this phase, yeah? We've got, for instance, for translation, translate with CAT tools, look up for terminology, perform concordances, know where information comes from. That's something that caught our attention as well. It seems that translators, when they are working, they might forget that the suggestions they get come from different places. It's not the same having a suggestion from the machine translation memory that from a machine translation, or even if it comes from the translation memory, it might be assembled from several translation units, so it might not be already validated. It might not have been already validated by a human translator. Perform focuses, internet searches, use speech recognition. I'll talk about that if I've got time. And no prompt design. All right, check-in was exactly the same. And if we move to the last stage, this post-production process, there were some tasks in particular that were highlighted by almost all the stakeholders. Of course, we need to verify the final version of the files that we will send to the client, but the feedback, we need to give feedback to all the agents, to all the stakeholders involved, and close the project. What does closing the project means? It used to mean the administrative closing of the project, so invoicing, taxes, all that. Now, it also it could already include these tasks in the past, but sometimes we don't really pay much attention to that. But right now, keeping our data very clean, very absolutely ready to be reused as soon as possible is key for the industry. So some things like performing TM cleanup and performing TB, terminology-based cleanup, are basic. It's what gives us an added value when we use our own technologies or when we adapt technologies to our context. So if we go the other way around, if we just pay attention to the skills, of course we have to learn how to use words, a text processor or a spreadsheet processor, but in what context? For me that was quite relevant because it taught me what kind of examples I need to use in class when I want to go through these tools. It doesn't make any sense to tell students, let's create a book, let's create a table of content. No, because they are not doing these tasks when they work with this tool professionally. So let's pay attention to the kind of tasks in which this tool will be involved. And this probably will lead how to include the tool in the class. Use speech recognition and also to input text and also speech synthesis. That called our attention that it seems that some stakeholders detected that it's faster to dictate than to write. So learning how to work when the input is oral and not written, and not done with the keyword, is relevant for some stakeholders. Right now, it's not very difficult to do it. Almost all the softwares that we use already allow you dictating. And also, once we have started experiencing that, we have detected that for students sometimes it helps them focusing on the text when they read and listen to the text at the same time. So language synthesis in this sense is also useful. Some technical writing. Technical writing is very relevant. All stakeholders mentioned that translators need to know the domain in which they are translating. They need to master that domain. Most of all in their mother tongue. So being specialized, having a niche, a domain in which they perform in an expert way is quite relevant, particularly when they pre-produce, when they prepare the source text, which is a task That's gaining attention as well, or also when they translate, whether with or without machine translation. Know how to pre-edit, how to write for, sorry, that's a typo, for machine translation. This is absolutely relevant. And this is a skill that almost nobody except translators is able to achieve, because it's a contrastive skill. You need to know what happens in the source text and how this source text will be processed into the target text, and how to adapt to make something explicit or not. Yeah? Inclusive language, that called our attention as well. It's not grammatically approached right now. No, at least to my knowledge, there is no language right now that includes inclusive language in the grammar itself, but many customers and many public institutions already have their own guides on how to use inclusive languages, and how to use these guides to create our own engines or to use LLMs in a particular way is also very relevant. How to write or update style guides, how to integrate style guides into current technologies, that's quite relevant, and that's something we can learn very easy. How to know where information comes from, I already mentioned that. How to manage or convert between file formats. I'm afraid that's something we have to do. Clients can give us files in several formats. It depends on the technology they use, and we need to be able to work with them. Process multimedia content, and that's relevant. Segment files, how to segment files appropriately for CAT tools and for machine translation. If we've got a PDF and we just do an OCR through this PDF, if the PDF doesn't come from a docs or from a text file, but it comes from a picture, it's wrong segmented. That means that the machine translation will use a translation unit that is wrong. It's not a whole sentence, and that probably will lead to a lot of post-editing, which is probably one thing that we don't desire. Basic Python, acquire some skills on prompt design is also important for pre-production, to revise text, to prepare content, but also for production stages. How to use LLMs for QA. We have to prepare that in advance before we do the QA. So that's something that is already included in the pre-production phase. How to use LLMs to summarize, rewrite. Let me go a bit fast through that. How to train or fine-tune empty models. That's probably the highest level in terms of technology, but it's something we can learn to do. It's not impossible. As soon as we learn a bit of Python, it's not that difficult to do that, and we can adapt the NMT models, the machine translation models, to our particular needs. Terminology. It has not changed very much. These are the basic terminological skills, but we conduct them in a different way. The problem now is to be an expert and decide and validate which is the right terminology. We can get terminology extracted through LLMs, and it works quite well. There are tools that are already specifically dedicated to that task, but who decides what is a term and what is a definition? This expert knowledge, it's probably among the skills of a translator. Let me just go further. There are some slides that have been hidden. You will get all of them. So in the end, after going through all these bunch of skills, we can pay attention again to this model where we've got all the phases. Each phase is divided into tasks. For each task, we've got particular tools, and something that is quite new right now, which are the techniques. I've called them techniques, but they are closer to fundamental knowledge for a translator than to essentially techniques. They are very close to the language domain and the cultural domain and the niche domain that we need to process a text. So that means that, going back to Heide's speech this morning, there is a translation technology theory underlying translation studies, probably. And that's all. I've been more or less introducing these questions during the presentation, and you can just download the whole set of slides from here. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I make it difficult to you.
Thank you very much for this exciting presentation. I have an extra mobile phone here. Is this yours? And I would like to introduce our next speaker, Giselle Spiteri-Midjani, who is an academic, a trainer, a consultant, and a practitioner. And she's active at the University of Malta. And she's going to talk about shifting competencies and emerging profiles in AI-driven dubbing. Giselle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Yes, so I'm going to be speaking today about a very specific role, a new professional role that is emerging, and that is related to audiovisual translation and more specifically to dubbing. And just like Professor Sanchez-Hijón, I'll be talking about the skills that are necessary for this professional profile. But allow me to first start with a little teaser or a demo of AI and AI-generated dub.
Have you heard of Nomad? These can go, right? Ah, sim. Bem melhor agora. A Nomad usou tecnologia para me fazer falar português. Mas a melhor parte é que ela pode fazer o seu dinheiro falar inglês. Com ela, você investe no exterior sem sair do Brasil, direto no aplicativo. E claro, uma conta sem fronteiras precisa de um cartão aceito mundialmente. Puedes usarlo para visitar una vinícola en Argentina, regarder la grande compétition à Paris, Nihon de Kaimono suru toki mo. Para me fazer falar tantas línguas diferentes, foi preciso um pouco de inteligência artificial, mas usar a Nomad é inteligência real. Abra sua conta internacional Nomad. Que maravilha!
So generally I like to look at the audience, when showing these type of videos, and I saw mixed reactions. I saw people go, oh, others like with worried looks and others smiling. So let's have a look a bit at the backstage of this. How is this created? And we can see that the voice is being cloned, so Will Smith's voice is being carried over. We have, this multilingual clip because we have the translation as well, and we also have perfect lip syncing, right? The lips matching. So let's see what happens backstage, but before doing so, allow me to step a little backwards and talk very briefly about traditional dubbing workflows, so then we can compare. So what happens in traditional workflows is, for example, is a traditional human dub.
Ele comprou clandestinamente. Comprou de líbio. Professor, are you positive that Ria was caught?
Warum gibt's noch keine Schlagzeile?
So I know you're all familiar with this. So this time you see we have different voices because we have different voice talents, different actors reciting and performing and recording the different target language versions. So from a language professional perspective, what happens? The translators / adapters extract the dialogue from the original product, we translate it, we adapt it, we rework it, and then we place it back into this lovely puzzle with all the filmic codes, and we cannot touch the other filmic codes. And this process must be seamless, it must go unnoticed. So much so that very often this kind of translation is also referred to as constrained writing, because we need to adapt the dialogue, but we need to fit within many constraints, like the images and the actor's performance and other constraints. Back to the translator. So what we do is we rewrite the text, we adapt the text, and we have these adaptation requirements to take into consideration. Synchronization perhaps is one of the most challenging, tasks in this adaptation process, because we need to adapt the words in the target language version so that it matches the timing, the tempo, the specific lip movements, and the body language of the speakers, of the actors that we see on screen. And I like to call this, therefore, the word-to-lip adaptation process, because we're adjusting the words to the mouth movements. And I generally give my students this chart, because when we match the specific lip movements, we need to match, for instance, the bilabial consonants, finding words in the target language, the fricatives, the certain lip-rounded vowels, like the O, the U. So you can imagine how challenging this is. And this is to synthesize the workflow in a traditional studio, dubbing in a traditional studio, so human-driven dubbing, where we have the preparation of the script, voice casting, and the actors actually recording, sound mixing, quality control when this applies, and you can see where the language professionals are involved traditionally and still currently, obviously, because both are coexisting, both AI dubbing and traditional dubbing. But you can see where they are involved. And in the backstage, we can see actors using the script, the text, the translation, to be able to perform the dialogue in the target language. So as you can imagine, there are many professional roles involved in the traditional dubbing studio process. And I highlighted specifically the linguist's role, translator, adapter. So what is happening now with these AI dubbing technologies? And I have another clip in Hungarian.
Mi a kedvenc városom a világon, amit szívesen látogatok, és miért? A kedvenc városom, nos, én nagyon szeretem Párizst. Imádom Párizst. A párizsi ételek fantasztikusak. Mintha lenne valami van ott, tudod, mint Franciaországban általában, mintha inspirálna. De aztán New York. Nagyon szeretek időt tölteni New Yorkban, mert van ott egyfajta sürgetés, és ez mindig...
So I stopped there because I don't have much time, but you can already tell, that there are lip-syncing issues, there are things we need to work on. I don't know Hungarian, so most likely even the text would need to be adjusted. So this is where the language professionals come into the picture. So if that was the traditional workflow, let us compare a little bit to what happens with an extreme scenario where we have these end-to-end solutions that could possibly automate the entire process, starting from the preparation of the script to the voice synthesis that replaces the actors, and then maybe also AI assistant mixing, and then that is where the language professionals generally are essential to to perform what is referred to as the speech and sound editing. And I'll explain this in a while. So just to give you some context, these AI dubbing technologies are being used by any users, because we also have self-service platforms available on the web, so any person can access those tools. So you can just simply, if you own video content, you can upload your own video content or a URL, and then within seconds or minutes, depending on how long and complex the video is, it could be a selfie video, okay? You get the dubbed version in multiple languages. But then we get to quality and all the rest. Then we have the tech providers who are developing these tools, and sometimes they also offer multilingual services themselves. And then we have the professional dubbing studios and media localization companies that are integrating professional AI dubbing solutions within the workflow. So you need to think that applications, we have podcasts, social media, e-learning, commercials, like the example I showed earlier with Will Smith, and the more debatable one, no media entertainment. Ooh, when we get to fiction and film, a lot of controversies and debates, okay? And yes, but you need to think that it's not always an end-to-end, completely automated scenario. We have what we call hybrid workflows, where one phase might be automated, and then we have the human intervention, or maybe another phase is automated. Maybe we have human actors, or we have human translators, so it's not always an end-to-end solution. In the end-to-end solutions, these are some of the tools that are being integrated within these platforms. So I'm not going to go into detail, but just to give you an idea of how a company like Adapt, for instance, that also offers multilingual services, how they combine several tools together to obtain this end result. So, hybrid workflows, as I mentioned, maybe one part of the process could be automated or maybe the other, so we have a variety. Do you remember I mentioned the word-to-lip adaptation process where translators have to adjust the script to suit the mouth movements? Well, it's not always applied, but we also have now the mouth synthesis technology that is able to adjust the lips on screen, as you saw with the Will Smith movie, with the Will Smith example commercial. But there you'd need consent from the actors. It's not always applied, this mouth synthesis technology. But it's there, and sometimes it's used simply to support or enhance the lip-syncing result, let's say, at the end of a completely human-driven dubbing workflow. So, where do human linguists come into the picture? They generally intervene with the so-called AI editor tools. So what happens? Do you remember the interview with Rosalia in Hungarian? Okay, so that would be the raw output of an AI dubbing platform. And then linguists would have to intervene by manipulating the text, basically checking the translation, retranslating, readapting, matching for the lip movements, also intervening on the audio timeline as well, maybe choosing the voices or confirming the voices. So we're moving on to other levels here of competencies. Maybe also analyzing and identifying the emotion of each dialogue line and identifying the intensity of every emotion, because then that needs to be carried over all the other multilingual versions. So can you see that the traditional linguist/translator profile is expanding here? It is enriched, and it also involves talking about tasks, Pilar, because even I like to align tasks and skills. To identify the tasks, we need to identify the skills, and vice versa as well. So they move in both directions, right? So these are some of the tasks that I'm kind of breaking down in these AI dubbing workflows. As you can see, also intervening with that timeline, the audio timeline, speech rate, synchronization, emotion setting, because that's what the industry calls it, identifying the emotions. How do you carry over the emotions? It could be through textual prompts. It could be through vocal overlay. So maybe as a translator, you have to record your own voice, not because your voice is going to be used, but because you're kind of informing the machine of how the intonation needs to be placed, the rising and falling tones, the speech melody. And then we mentioned the voice qualities, choosing the voices, tone and pitch. So we're moving into another dimension here. So what before was constrained writing, we cannot touch the other filmic codes. Well, in actual fact, if we include mouth synthesis, we're manipulating the images, no? If we're intervening when it comes to the actor's intonation and emotion and the voice, okay, then we're actually manipulating the actor's performance. So, all these professional roles we saw earlier, in reality, in actual fact, in AI dubbing workflows, the linguist has to cover most of these roles. Hence, as you can imagine, you need to have more skills. So these are some of, so you see that I'm not lying, okay? Some of the job titles that have been appearing on the market. These are some of the names that are used. I don't necessarily agree with all the titles, okay? But the stakeholders are not always aware of the complexity of the role of the dubbing linguist in this process. So in fact, I like to use the words AI dubbing specialists, speech and sound specialists, linguists, because I want to emphasize your expertise as translators, your value and the know-how as language professionals. I don't have time, but again, so you see that I'm not lying, some of the job descriptions, job vacancies that have been appearing online, so actually this is a role that is sought after right now, and you can have a look on the web and you can see the requirements, but I'll break it down for you. So, why did I develop this? Well, I developed this mainly because of the urgency of the situation, because speaking with stakeholders now, when I see that they think it's just kind of editing or post-editing, and you have to draw their attention, you have to tell them, look, no, it's way more than that. You really need skilled professionals for this AI dubbing linguist role. So this is why I experimented with tools from a practitioner perspective. I speak continuously dialogue with the stakeholders. I analyze job descriptions. I broke down the tasks, all of this to develop a competence profile. A competence profile that can be applied in training settings, but also to inform the stakeholders. Because if you break it down for them and you tell them, look, you need at least these 4 competence domains, you need these professionals who are able to cover these competencies. And that is where, therefore, they look for our master's students, for our translation students. I don't have time to go into detail, but as you can imagine, audiovisual translation expertise is still highly necessary with a few add-ons, let's say. So in my own training as an academic, as a trainer in audiovisual translation, I have been integrating new skills as well, like speech recognition skills. I have been emphasizing quality assessment a lot. You can imagine this level of performance, expressiveness, authenticity, emotion. These are other skills. It's another skill set. It's about prosody. It's about speech modulation. Technical skills, of course, tool proficiency, transversal skills. For instance, Pilar mentioned prompts, okay? If you need to instruct a machine on how to perform a certain emotion, you need the skills and the clear language to be able to do that. So, educational context. How am I myself applying this? First of all, yes, we can implement training specifically with these AI dubbing platforms and editor tools, but also I think it is really important, really essential even more, to keep developing this foundational knowledge and expertise, and mostly specific to this new professional profile. Emphasizing quality evaluation training, identifying issues and errors, being able to label them and categorize them, and then determining the action, how to address those issues. So I've reached the end of my talk because I'll have a workshop later on. So basically, to give you a heads up, in this workshop, it will be practical, hands-on, and we'll be actually carrying out some small exercises tied to this AI dubbing linguist professional role. That's it from my end. I hope I wasn't too fast. The interpreters generally hate me for this. So I hope that was manageable, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. And now I would like to introduce the very last speaker in this session before the lunch break. That's our colleague, Szilárd Slavik, who is an assistant professor at our department. He's going to talk about the perfection or imperfection of artificial and natural intelligence, and he's going to give us a comparative view of human and machine translation quality.
Great. Good morning, or it should probably be already good afternoon because it's after 12 o'clock, but we are before lunch, so it doesn't matter. Thank you very much for coming today to my presentation, which is the imperfection of artificial and natural intelligence. To begin with, I would like to refer to one of the main conclusions of the ALICE 2026 survey. According to the recently published findings, the European language industry is currently undergoing a rapid transformation driven by AI, so by artificial intelligence. And on the one hand, automation is increasing efficiency and generating a growing number of demand for translated content. But on the other hand, it also presents a number of challenges and certain risks. After an initial phase of rather uncritical and largely unregulated AI adoption, the industry now seems to be recognizing the limitations, the limits of AI once again, and as a result, the demand for services related to human quality assurance has increased. Overall, the ALICE findings suggest that the industry is moving towards more hybrid workflow or to more hybrid workflows that combine AI-driven processes with human expertise, and alongside with greater market consolidation and higher degree of specialization. The two main components of this quality assurance are post-editing in case of machine translation and revision, which applies to human translations. The reviser's task is to check the content in the target language, correct any errors, and improve the overall quality of the text. But if we look at the task, at the role of the post-editor, we can see that the tasks are quite similar, and this raises some important questions, like who exactly is the post-editor? Is the post-editor essentially acting as a translator or rather as a reviser? When we look at these three activities, so translation, revision, and post-editing, either from professional experience or from different studies, it's not entirely clear how they relate to one another. For example, does post-editing replace revision, as we can see in some cases in the industry, or is it simply a way of bringing a machine-translated text up to the level of quality we would normally expect from a translator? Another question we might ask is whether a post-edited text still needs to be revised or not. Our research group, called Human in the Translation Loop, also examined this issue. The central question of our study was whether revision is still necessary after machine-generated texts have already been post-edited. And to investigate this, we received translation project packages from the European Commission's Directorate General for Translation, so from DGT. These packages included the source texts that were public press releases, the machine translations produced by the EU's own translation engine, eTranslate, as well as the post-edited and the revised version of the translations. After many, many hours of work and detailed contrastive text analysis, we came to the conclusion that both post-editing and revision play an important role in the quality assurance. In other words, the human factor continues to be fundamental in the translation process. Although the post-editor has a particularly strong influence on the final quality of the text, the expected and observed fit-for-purpose quality can be only achieved through the combined work of both the post-editor and the reviser. We also observed that the work of a post-editor in many ways quite similar to that of a translator, as post-editors often make preference-based changes and frequently work with alternative solutions when improving the text quality. My own research is also closely related to this project, and in a way it also feels or tries to fill a gap in this study. The research group focused exclusively on texts that had been first machine translated. But in contrast, my aim was to compare the machine-assisted translation or machine translation process with translation produced entirely by humans, so without artificial intelligence. In today's presentation, I will present my findings on the types of errors and the kinds of operations that are characteristic for these two approaches. I will also show you an evaluation about the quality of the final translation, and I'm going to compare my results with those of the research group. In this presentation, I focus mainly on 4 main research questions which were part of my study. First, I examined what type of errors can be found in machine translations, both before and after post-editing. Then I looked at the same issue in human translations, analyzing the types of errors before and after the revision. For this part of the analysis, I used the same methods as the research group, so I wanted to be sure that my results are comparable with those of the research group. Besides, I also wanted to find out what kind of operations post-editors and revisers actually perform during the revision process. And finally, I compared the overall quality of the post-edited text with that of the revised human translations. As in the previously mentioned research with the human in the translation loop team, the corpus was provided by the DGT. It consists of 5 texts that were translated within the EU using eTranslate, machine translation, post-edited, and then published, so without revision, from English into Hungarian. I asked professional translator and revisers to work on these source texts, and I asked them to translate the text without the use of artificial intelligence, and then to do a revision as well. So this is how the corpus is structured. First, we have the source text in the middle. Then on the left, you can see the Hungarian translation produced by EU translators with the help of a translation engine. And on the right side, we can see the, let's say, traditional translation, which was produced by human translators and then revised. The source texts used in this study were also press releases on different topics intended for a more general audience. These are not the exact same texts as those used by the research team, but the text type is the same, and the methods applied in the analysis are identical. So this means that the results of these two studies can be directly compared. To categorize the errors, I use the same typology as the research group. This system, what we see, is based on the DGT's own error typology, but we extended it by incorporating the MQM core. The reason for this was that during the analysis of machine translations, we found that the original DGT categories were not always sufficiently detailed. And the additional categories, which are highlighted yellow on the slide, were therefore introduced by the research team. This typology consists of 5 main categories. These are terminology, accuracy, which refers to issues relating to equivalence, linguistic norms like grammar, punctuation, and spelling, as well as job-specific and general style. I think it is important to note that these last two categories do not refer to minor issues, but rather they are issues that affect the comprehensibility and processability of a text. For example, non-idiomatic phrasing or overly complex sentence structures, and so on and so forth. And this framework was applied to all versions of the text, so for the machine translation, for the post-edited version, for the human translation, and for the revised version. To ensure reliability, both error identification and classification or categorization were carried out using double coding. I also categorized the types of modifications, so not just the errors, based on Robin's framework. Robin distinguishes between 4 main types of modifications. The first one is rule-based modification, which involve correcting elements that violate equivalence or linguistic rules. The second one is norm-based modifications. They are not strictly about rules, but rather about confirming to accepted language norms. The third type is strategy-based modifications, which relate to broader communication principles and text construction strategies. These are not necessarily about correcting errors, but about improving the overall quality of a text. And finally, we have the preference-based modifications. These are basically unnecessary interventions. They do not actually improve the text, but reflect alternative choices, and in some cases, they may even introduce new problems, new errors in the text. Okay, let me now turn to the key findings. Throughout this part of the presentation, the results are expressed as standardized values for 1,000 words. Here, for example, we can see the average number of errors per 1,000 words in machine translation compared to human translations. What immediately stands out is a difference in the overall number of errors. In the text I analyzed, machine translation contained more than twice as many errors as human translations. However, this difference is not only quantitative but also qualitative. In human translations, the errors that revisers have to deal with are distributed relatively evenly across categories. But in contrast, in machine translation, post-editors tend to encounter 2 clear peaks: accuracy and style-related errors. This figure shows the percentage distribution of errors. What it reveals is that although revisers deal with a much smaller number of errors overall, a larger proportion of these are content-related, so accuracy and terminology issues. But what is particularly striking, however, as we have seen, machine-translated texts contain more than twice as many errors, and almost half of these errors are style-related errors. As I mentioned earlier, this type of problem has a direct impact on readability and processability, and basically on overall comprehensibility. So we can say it is a huge amount. Let's now take a closer look to at the type of operations performed by post-editors and revisers. Based on the texts I analyzed, post-editors carried out roughly 3 times as many operations as revisers. A clear pattern also emerges in the case of revisers. They tend to perform mainly the more mandatory rule-based operations, and as the operation become less essential or even unnecessary, their frequency decreases. This pattern is not observed among post-editors. In their case, the number of preference-based operations is particularly noticeable. This finding is in line with the results of the research group and suggests that the post-editors tend to think more like translators and actively exploring alternative solutions. If we now take a closer look at the proportion, we can see that during post-editing, preference-based operations actually outnumber we can see that preference-based operations actually outnumber strategy-based one, and they come close to the number of the rule-based or norm-based operations. So to put it very simply, it means we could say that roughly a quarter of the operations carried out during post-editing are in fact unnecessary. And despite the much greater effort involved and the significantly higher number of modifications made by post-editors, a comparison of the final text still reveals clear differences in the quality between the two type of text, so between post-edited machine translation and revised human translation. This figure shows weighted and standard as well used. The weighting was carried out using the same method as in the research group. So major errors which have a serious or more serious impact on meaning were assigned 5 points, while all other minor errors received 1 point. Very interesting that machine translated text performed better in only one category, in terminology. But actually, this is not completely surprising, given that the EU has a very high-quality terminology database, which strongly support the work of their post-editors and probably also the machine translation itself. In other categories, however, the revised human translation achieved higher quality. Style errors, in particular, deserve special attention. As we've seen, post-editors spend the most effort on these, both in terms of quality and proportion, and yet this is precisely where the largest gap between the two versions can be still observed. So these findings and the findings of the research group suggest that these types of errors are responsible for what we often perceive as machine translation is, that slightly unnatural quality of the text. And I think the results clearly show that, thank you, that this kind of error is much less frequent in human translation, and this is exactly why these texts tend to sound more natural and more easier to read. I was almost certain I would run out of time, but let me briefly show you one example related to readability. I think this sentence nicely illustrates how machine translation can influence post-editors' decisions to such an extent that the final result is not always as clear as a sentence produced by a human translator. I should apologize for those who don't speak Hungarian. This example may not be equally clear for everyone, but it is about overly embedded clauses, probably arising from an interference with the source language. Okay, let me now just briefly summarize the main conclusions. In the research group, we already shown that both post-editing and revision play an important role in quality assurance. Those results suggested that if you use machine translation, a fit-for-purpose quality can only be achieved through the combined use of these two activities, even though post-editing tends to have a stronger impact on the final text. My findings confirm this, and they also show that post-editing requires considerably more efforts and a much higher number of interventions than revision. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that in the absence of artificial intelligence, that is in the case of fully human translation, the text represented a clearly higher quality than post-edited machine translation. And this raises an important question. What do we actually mean by fit-for-purpose quality? So did this level change somehow since we use machine translation and artificial intelligence? We may think about it. And finally, I think my results are also support the previous observation. Due to the high number of preference-based interventions and the strong impact on the final text, post-editing can, in many respects, be closer to translation itself, and so a revision after post-editing should be considered. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Szilárd. May I ask the four of you to come and sit here for the questions, because those watching us online will not see you in any other way, so it's much better for the communication. So we have some time for questions. If you would like our helpers to, okay, Claudia, can we have a microphone here? So please say who you are and who you are asking.
First of all, I would like to thank to all the presenters for the wonderful presentations, but I have a question for Szilárd. Considering your analyzed text genre, I have a question for Szilárd, for the last presenter. You focused on EU press releases. So considering your text genre, which was highly specific, but still it was not the most standardized EU text out of all that you could have in comparison with traditional EU directives or regulations, I suppose. But I have a question. Do you think that you would arrive at the same or comparable research results with a different text genre, not necessarily EU related?
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, I didn't, or I haven't made any research like that till now, because it is the topic of my dissertation. But I promise you, as soon as I'm ready with it, I will, of course, there are room for a lot of further investigation in this field. I only have impressions about this. Maybe the numbers would be different, but the trends would be somehow same, also with other text types. I don't know, have I answered your question?
Thank you. Because as we know, the more template-like a certain text type is, the better it will perform in terms of machine translation. And as soon as a text requires a more creative input from a translator, so the less suitable it is for machine translation, isn't it?
I would say so, but actually I have post-editing classes here at ELTE, and we already try to post-edit machine-translated user manuals, which I think quite template-like, and they were not as good as I expected, so.
Okay, so as soon as you have more concrete research results, I would be happy just to hear about them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I wish you a lot of success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. I can see two hands at the back. Please say who you are and who you are asking.
I will stand up so who I'm speaking to can see me. I am coming from the Partium Christian University, and I am a master's student about to graduate, so I'm a little scared to go out into the workforce. It seems scary now, but I have a question addressing Giselle and her presentation. So other than cost cutting for companies, what other realistic benefit does AI dubbing provide? So as us going into the workforce, I feel as if though I will have just as much work to do with editing and looking for mistranslations or problems with the AI automated dubbing that this thing provides, that is most certainly coming to the future or to the near future, and it will be the future of dubbing. I also understand that it's a great way to have translators to have them have editorial skills, but is the usage of AI really necessary if it requires us to do so much post-editing?
What's your name again? Sorry, what's your name? Emission. How much time do you have, Emission? That's a huge question. Really interesting, multifaceted, so I'm not sure I can answer everything in there. Emission. So, where do I start at? So, first of all, the aim of my presentation was kind of twofold. On the one hand, there are the concerns, okay, like will I still be doing what I'm being trained for? What is my role going to be? But I also wanted to wanted to highlight the opportunities as well. Because if you're the type of person who likes to also expand your skill set, so because I don't look at it only as editorial role, as in there's also a creative decision-making process involved in this type of work, because you might be choosing voices, you might have to tweak the tone and the pitch, and you have to analyze emotion and make sure the emotion is being carried over. How is the emotion being carried over through the linguistic level, through the prosodic level? So we can look at it, okay, as, you know, we have the threat on the one hand, but we can also look at it as an opportunity where we can actually, you know, expand as linguists and move into other dimensions. Now, Emission, for the time being, both processes are still coexisting. The completely traditional process, the complete automated process with the human editing at the end of the process, hybrid where you might be involved in one process or not the other. So for the time being, my advice would be to kind of be open to any kind of opportunity that can come and be prepared skills-wise, because you may need to do the entire process traditionally or part of it. The other part of your question was AI dubbing, like in general, how necessary it is. Now, that's a big question. I think that the key is going to be, it depends to which product it is applied. So probably there would be certain products where it's more suitable, you know, maybe informative videos, e-learning, or maybe commercials, but then there's the more maybe emotion-driven content, fiction, film, and everything. So in my opinion, it's going to depend very much on where it is applied, and I hope that we still maintain kind of a bit the control and be involved in the decision-making process of, you know, where to draw a line and where to apply these technologies and where not to apply these technologies and to what extent. I commit to trying as much as possible to advocating for you linguists, advocating for your expertise, for your value, for the skills. So this is why I'm doing as much as possible through research and through this work with the stakeholders to kind of explain as well the complexity of the layers. And I don't like the word editorial much, or editing, because I'm afraid that that kind of narrows down the vision of the actual significant and immense intervention. It's not just about mistranslations, Emission. For the time being, you have to actually readapt everything anyway, just like in the traditional process, as things stand right now, and depending on the platform, depending on the product, and so on and so forth. So I hope you'll be there later on for the workshop so I can give you more details on the level of intervention. I hope I answered at least a fraction of that wish. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. I can see a hand there. Yes, Esther.
Before I ask this question, I'm going to ask this of Szilárd, so I'd like to ask if it is all right if I ask this question in Hungarian. Or should I ask it in English for the benefit of the audience?
Please right, so ask it in English.
So, in English, I'm Esther, and this is I was the one who somewhat awkwardly addressed the presenters in the plenary. And the question is, when it comes to a combined process of post-editing and revision, Do you see this as being divided along the lines of, do you see, for instance, the post-editing process being something like the bilingual revision, whereas the human revision would be like the monolingual revision? Or do you see it as a bilingual revision and post-editing on top of a bilingual revision and post-editing? Basically, how do you see this being divided across the twofold bilingual and monolingual revision process?
Who are you asking, Esther?
I was asking Szilárd.
Szilárd.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think this is exactly what we did with the Human in the Translation research team. We analyzed machine-translated text, post-edited machine translation, and revised and post-edited machine translations. And I think we have seen there that even though a machine translation has been already post-edited, there are such problems in the text which, because of which the revision should be ideally also bilingual. So that would be the short answer for that, but I don't know if this topic is interesting for you, then we can discuss it in a break.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentations and also for the questions. I would like to encourage you to ask more questions from our guests in the breaks. Okay, they will be around today. And from now on, we're going to have free time, also called as lunch break. Okay, please be back at 2 o'clock and then we will continue. And thank you very much again.